Gather around, friend. Picture a horse dragging in from the west. Clara Whitmore barely spotted it. She was elbow-deep in suds, scrubbing a pair of her late husband's old work trousers she couldn't part with. That's when a sudden flicker of movement slipped right through the heavy wooden fence posts. Looked like a shadow early on. It was dark against that bleeding prairie sunset, drifting way too slow for a man wanting shelter by nightfall. She stood tall, wiped her wet hands dry, and just stared. The beast was a brown bay. Even from 50 paces, she knew trouble was riding it. That poor creature hung its head low. The gait was awful stumbling, dragging along like a busted thing, trying hard to remember how its own legs functioned. As for the fella in the saddle, he sat crooked. He was slouched heavy over the saddle horn, curled up tight like he was shielding something precious underneath his coat. Clara held her ground, not hollering out, mostly because nobody was around to hear it anyway. Out on this harsh frontier claim, it was just her. Both hired hands were gone till Sunday. She was used to being alone, knew that heavy feeling. She marched toward the gate. The animal pushed another 30 yards before giving up entirely. It wasn't spooked, mind you. It halted how dead-tired creatures do, with a terrible, heavy finality. Its legs shivered hard, head dropping right down into the tall prairie grass. Slowly, the poor brute folded. Front knees first, then the rear. It collapsed sideways into the trail dust, taking the rider down with it. He spilled onto the hard earth and didn't twitch. Clara was already sprinting out to meet them. She reached him in no time flat, hitting her knees hard. He laid face down in the dirt, giving her a clear view of his ruined back right away. His shirt was ripped wide open. A dark, ugly crust stained his left shoulder. Something Clara knew instantly was old, dried blood from a bad wound. Had to be a day or two old. When she rolled him over, his face was blistered raw from the sun, lips completely busted open, eyes shut tight. "Hey!" She grabbed him firm and shook. "Hey there, mister." Then she heard a noise. A sound so small and out of place out here on the quiet prairie, she nearly thought she made it up. A weak, trembling cry. That wasn't any grown man's voice. She glanced down at his chest where his arms locked tight around a thick coat bundle. He tied it down fast. He'd strung a heavy rope over his shoulders, tying his arms fast around the bundle. A dead man's knot, designed so he wouldn't drop his cargo if he passed out. It was the most desperate, gut-wrenching sight she'd ever laid eyes on out west. What on earth, she mumbled, tearing at the rough knot with numb fingers. "Come on, come on." Finally, the hitch slipped. She peeled back the heavy canvas coat. Two tiny faces stared up into the harsh light, while they were far too small to really focus. Twin baby girls. Couldn't have been more than 3 months old if she was placing a bet. Swaddled tight in what used to be a woman's shawl, faded yellow wool with blue stitching. You and I know that's a garment a mother knits during a long, freezing winter. They were soaked in sweat, burning up, both crying hard now. That sharp, helpless newborn wail. Less like pure anger, more like a tragic question. Where did everything go? Why are things so awful now? Clara glanced from the bawling orphans back to the stranger. His chest barely rose, but breath was still there. "All right," she whispered to the empty plains. She muttered it the way folks do when they desperately need a second to figure out their next move. All right. She couldn't haul all 3 bodies at once. That was just plain pioneer reality. She gathered up those infants first, pressing them tight to her heart as she rushed up to the porch, leaving the injured man for a moment. He was far heavier than he appeared. Cowboys always are once they become dead weight. Dragging his boots off the dirt took 2 solid heaves and a stream of harsh curses she never would have spoken in church. She hauled him onto the porch stairs, pulling upward 1 agonizing step at a time. His heavy boots dragged across the timber right through her door. She dumped him flat on the parlor floorboards. It was way closer than the back bedroom, and her arms were completely burned out from the brutal labor. The cowboy let out a groan, hitting the floor. "Good," she spat. "Means you ain't dead." She marched straight into the kitchen, pumped a basin full of water, gathered every clean rag in sight, and hurried right back. She'd tucked those little ones into an old woven laundry basket. Sure wasn't pretty, but the sides were tall, and they couldn't roll out on their own. She checked on the infants first. They were starving, mad as hell, wailing at the cruel injustice of it all. But she couldn't dare feed them yet, not until she knew what milk they'd been taking out on the trail. She grabbed a tin cup, mixing warm water with a tiny splash of canned milk, carefully testing the heat against her own skin. She spent 20 minutes coaxing drops into both of them, just enough to quiet the worst of their hollering. They didn't exactly settle, but the wailing fell to a tired fussing. Now let's step back and look at the stranger. She didn't know his name yet. She'd uncover it soon enough in his dusty coat pocket. A battered piece of paper reading Silas Boon, scratched out in someone else's messy frontier scrawl, maybe a scrap he hauled for some other poor soul out there. Or his own name jotted down, so at least his memory survived if he met his end. She scrubbed out that shoulder wound. Nasty piece of work, too. No bullet hole, just a jagged gash. Could be a bad fall. Could be something much worse out there. She packed it with clean rags and bound it up tight. Then she squeezed drops of water from a damp cloth, coaxing it past his cracked lips, slow and steady. She pulled off his boots, those soles practically falling to pieces, and found blisters painting both feet where that leather quit miles back. But his hands told a harder story. The palms were rubbed raw, chewed straight down to the meat. Reins, she figured. He had gripped those leather straps so damn hard he wore his own skin away. Come midnight, he stirred. Not a sudden jump, mind you. Just those eyes cracking open, staring up at the roof boards like he had never seen a house before. Then his hands started twitching, reaching out, grasping at empty air, and she saw pure prairie panic washing right over his face. The babies, she told him quick and sharp, to cut that fear down. They are right here. They are safe. Right over there. He turned his heavy head. That basket sat 3 feet away, both little girls finally sleeping soundly in the quiet. Tiny chests rising and falling. Little fists curled up tight against their cheeks. He just stared at them for a good long while. He swallowed hard. They took some milk, Clara said. They are half-starved. I will ride to town for real supplies tomorrow, but tonight they will do just fine. You kept them alive. The man stayed dead silent for another minute. He pulled his breath in slow and heavy, like drawing air was a choice he had to force. You own this place, he finally muttered. His voice rasped out in jagged pieces, rough as dry desert gravel. Sure do. My husband passed 2 winters back. He soaked that truth in, then mumbled, I did not know where else to ride. A fellow told me once about a widow out this way, said she was decent folks. Clara just kept her eyes on him. You rode 30 miles on a rumor. Closer to 34, he whispered. I was not thinking too straight. Now you and I know a broken spirit when we see one. He almost laughed, but it died in his throat. Who are they? Clara asked, keeping her tone dead level. He shut his eyes tight. She watched his dusty face twitch, some dark memory fighting to break through right under his skin. Found them 4 days back, he said. River crossing about 20 miles east of the Platte. A train of 8 wagons. He choked up. And everybody was dead. He said it hollow, flat as a river rock, the way terrible truths sound when you have whispered them 1,000 times. I rode up on the rear guard. Smelled that heavy smoke first. Figured they were camped out, but that was no campfire. He paused again, found the last wagon checking through the wreckage for anyone breathing. The mother, she had shoved her girls under the floorboards to hide them. She laid her own body right over that hatch. Been dead so long, I almost walked right past. Clara sat rigid like stone. She was long gone when I found her, he whispered, but the little ones were still kicking. She managed to keep them dead quiet through the slaughter. He opened his eyes, staring hollowly at that woven basket. I did not know what to do. Could not just abandon them out there. I thought about pushing for the nearest settlement, but He faltered again, and this time that hard mask of his cracked wide open. You could see the raw, bleeding terror moving right across his eyes. I found fresh tracks in the dirt. Those killers had doubled back, hunting around, checking the corpses. Figured if I rode the main trail, I would be spotted. So you cut cross-country. I cut through the wild. Clara exhaled a slow, heavy breath. She glanced down at the sleeping twins, then back to the drifter. Who are they? She pressed again. Do you know their kin? Found a worn Bible in the wreckage. The family name was Calloway, out of Ohio. Listed a father and a mother, but I never... He shifted his weight and winced hard. I did not look close. I just needed to ride like hell. You did the righteous thing, she told him. He looked at her like a man expecting a hanging. Get some sleep, she ordered. We have plenty of sunrise to figure out the rest. Those babies are safe. And so are you. That is enough for one night. He did not fight it. Truth is, the man had zero fight left in his bones. His heavy eyelids dropped, and in 2 flat minutes, that ragged breathing smoothed out into a deep, steady rhythm. Clara just sat on those floorboards next to the basket. Lord knows how long she kept watch there. Outside, the great prairie settled into that eerie post-midnight hush. Not exactly peaceful, just completely hollowed out. The western wind died down, and the coyotes finally quit their howling. She sat listening to the tiny breaths, listened to the sleeping stranger, Silas Boon. That crumpled paper scrap said, "Just breathe." She thought on a pioneer woman she never knew, cramming her daughters beneath dusty wagon boards, throwing her own life over that hatch, and holding the line until the bitter end. You and I can only guess at that kind of courage. She reckoned she understood it a little, not completely, but deeply enough. That drifter slept 18 straight hours. Clara never did. She scraped together 3 or 4 broken hours in her rocking chair, guarding those orphans while they rested between feedings. She saddled up at first light, making 6 dusty miles round trip before 9. She rode back, packing canned milk, fresh cloth, and a rubber nip-lead bottle she practically had to wrestle away from old Mercer down at the general store. She claimed some young kin were visiting, and she needed those provisions in a real hurry. Now she used that steel-cold tone, meaning the talking was over, and Mercer, bless his cowardly heart, just sold her the goods without another peep. Time she finally made it back home, those 2 little fillies were awake and spitting mad. Took her that whole first morning just to tell them apart. The left one carried a faint mark behind her ear, a tiny pale moon most folks would miss. That particular gal woke up boiling mad and cooled off awful slow. The other woke up quiet, but could jump to hollering in under 10 seconds flat without a lick of warning. 2 wildly different spirits already. Clara reckoned they were no more than 10 to 12 weeks old. It struck her as downright amazing how they had already carved out their own clear natures. She hung some temporary names on them in her mind, namely just to keep things straight when bone tired. Rose for the baby with the mark, and Wren for the other. She told herself those names were just dust in the wind. You and I know she was wrong, but she couldn't see it yet. Working on her second round of feeding, she sat out on that sun-baked porch balancing a baby on each knee. She quickly figured juggling both at once was a damn sight better than hearing one wail while the other drank her fill. That is when the screen door creaked, and Silas Boon stepped out. He moved slow, like a busted-up cowboy taking stock of his aching bones and coming up a few short. He had tracked down the water basin she left, plus that clean shirt slung over the chair back. Belonged to her late husband, a giant of a man. But Silas was broad enough to fill it out. He had tried his hardest to scrape himself presentable, which was not much, but it showed a lick of effort. He stood staring at her on the porch, eyed the tiny babies, then stared right back at her. "You better take a seat before you hit the dirt," she warned. "Chair is right there." He dropped into the seat on her left, resting his wrapped hands heavy on his knees. For a long spell, he just stared out across the flat, dusty plains without breathing a single word. The harsh afternoon sun was doing that magic trick it does come autumn, casting long, golden shadows across the tall grass tops, making the whole vast prairie look like a quiet, sweeping wildfire. "Much obliged," he finally muttered. "You can repay me with hard work, once you can actually stand up straight again. Till then, save your breath." He gave her a sideways glance. "You always like this." "Like what?" "Practical. Is that a grievance?" No, he swore it was not. Wren had drained her bottle and was sizing Silas up with that wide, spooked look a little baby gets when spotting a rugged stranger. Acting like the arrival of a new soul in this harsh territory is both fascinating and highly suspicious. He glanced back at Clara. "She does not blink much," he noted. "She does it to spook folks." "I noticed." Clara hoisted the little sprout onto her shoulder, starting the careful business of drumming up a burp. "What is your move once you heal up?" He stayed quiet a beat. "I need to fetch the local law. What I saw out on that trail the sheriff needs to document." He paused. "And somebody must ask around about these girls. Find their kin." "You reckon there is family?" "There always is. Whether they will want them is another riddle." Clara held her tongue on that. "And you?" he pressed. "What about me?" "What happens to the twins, meanwhile?" She glanced down at baby Rose, who had gone dead asleep against her arm, with that heavy, boneless surrender only a newborn can pull off. Then she eyed Wren, who was still glaring at Silas like he might try pulling a fast one. "Meanwhile," Clara muttered, "I keep them breathing." Now you and I know survival out here is just that brutal and simple. The lawman finally rode up on day 3. Clara had sent a message back, with the boy delivering her weekly rations. Nathan Hale rode out that afternoon. He was a thick-set man pushing 50, sporting a rugged, leathered face, and a slow, cautious drawl that made his mind mighty hard to read. The sheriff jawed with Silas for a long, long while. Clara hovered on the far side of the cabin, catching the low rumble of men talking without picking up a single word. She heard Silas mapping out what he discovered down by the river ford. She felt the heavy pauses marking the bloody parts, and caught the sheriff digging for answers in that sluggish drawl. She caught unfamiliar names, and she heard the word tracks dropped several times. When old Nathan finally sauntered in to find her, he stood, filling the kitchen doorway, holding his dusty hat. He stared at those little twins for a long, quiet spell before finally speaking up. "You folks know anything about the Calloway family?" he asked. "Just what he shared. An Ohio clan heading out west to stake a claim." He turned the brim of his hat. "The husband's folks hail from back east. Wife had some sister out in Kansas. I will send a wire. It takes time tracking kin." "How much time?" Old Nathan just shrugged. It was an honest shrug, not some slippery dodge. "Weeks," he said. "Maybe more. These things—" Then he just stopped. The real question was what happens to those little girls meanwhile, and it sure seemed like she'd already answered that. Seemed like the only answer. He gave a slow nod, glancing at baby Wren in her basket. She was wide awake, making soft little noises to herself, just a tiny private ramble headed towards some mighty important destination. He eyed Rose, sleeping under a thin cloth. "I'll file the paperwork," he promised. "Legal temporary setup, just till we track down kin." "That's all I ask," Claire said. He nodded, giving her a look. Wasn't exactly pity, wasn't pure admiration either, but it sat right on that same dusty trail. "You certain about this?" "I was sure before I was sure," she told him. Out here that made no sense, yet made perfect sense. Nathan Hale clearly understood. He just tipped his hat back onto his head, promised he'd be in touch, and left. Let me tell you, out on the frontier, nights were the hardest. Not scary, exactly, just long and flat-out relentless. Those twins ran on a stubborn clock that had absolutely nothing to do with any normal human notion of sleep. Claire might settle them by 10. Then Wren wakes at midnight. Rose at 2 a.m. By 4, they'd both be hollering together over some private prairie injustice Claire could never quite figure out. She quickly learned to step through that dark cabin without striking a single lantern. She figured out the exact gentle pressure it took to calm down each baby. Little Rose needed her back patted in a slow, steady rhythm. Wren, strangely enough, just wanted to be held completely still, arms pinned down tight while somebody muttered to her in a low, even rumble, talking about absolutely nothing that mattered. She just needed that voice. Come the 5th day, Silas started rising for the 4 a.m. feeding. He never even asked. He just appeared in the dark doorway at midnight while both babies were hollering. He lifted Wren from her basket, standing tall, holding her exactly how Claire had described. Arms pinned still, voice steady. Telling her about the time his old horse got bogged down in a muddy creek bed. Man and beast spent all afternoon wrestling a fix that involved a heavy fence post and a heap of creative cussing. The baby just stared at him. He kept right on talking. Claire fed Rose, watching them from across the room. She stopped crying, she whispered. I noticed, he said. What are you telling her? Exactly what I said. The horse and the creek bed. And that works? Claire asked. Apparently, she finds the story soothing. He glanced down at little Wren, whose eyes were finally shut. Either that or she's putting herself to sleep out of pure spite. Might just be the spite, Claire agreed. They stayed awake together until 5 a.m. Both sat flat on the kitchen floor, resting heavy against the wood cabinets, lacking the strength to even reach a proper chair. The oil lamps burned low. You know how the prairie gets. Something moved out in that tall grass. Maybe a deer, maybe the wind, maybe absolutely nothing. You got family? Claire asked. She never meant to pry. It just spilled out into the quiet. None that are in the habit of writing letters, he replied. What's that mean? She pressed. Means they're alive, but we reached a firm understanding about keeping our distance. She gave him a sideways glance. Where are you from originally? Missouri. Long time ago. He paused. You? Kansas. My husband's folks were from here. We moved out after the wedding. You like it? She chewed on that. Sure didn't at first. It's a tough country to love. Too flat, howling in the wind, and dead quiet when it dies down. She stared at her calloused hands. Been out here 7 years. I think I like it now. Or I grew into it. Sometimes I reckon those are the exact same thing. Silas nodded, slowly understanding that frontier truth. You planning to stay? She asked. When you're healed enough to ride out, will you? He looked over at that makeshift crib at baby Rose's tiny fist curled against the wicker edge, which was already getting too tight for both twins, then glanced up at Wren's sleeping face. I don't rightly know, he said. God's honest truth. She respected rugged honesty far more than comfortable lies. She finally faded out against the cabinet around 5:30. She stirred awake at 6:30, finding a heavy wool blanket draped over her tired shoulders. Both twins were dead asleep, the rich smell of boiling coffee drifting from the iron stove. She sat up, worked the kink from her neck, and looked around. Silas stood by the window, gripping a hot cup in his bandaged hands, just watching the pale morning break over that eastern prairie grass. You and I have seen faces like that. He looked less dead today, but still like a man forever rearranged by a storm. A man doesn't survive a brutal river crossing like he described without carrying that weight forever. Yet there was a new settled steadiness in his stance today. Coffee is hot, he murmured, never even turning around. I see that. You need to eat something. You lecturing me about food? I'm not lecturing, she said, just observing. She climbed up her weary bones, complaining about that hard floor, and poured herself a cup. You and I know how quiet the frontier gets. Picture them at opposite ends of that kitchen, morning sun creeping in. Those twins just sleeping in their little baskets. Outside, that endless Nebraska prairie stretched out in every single direction. Big, cold, and not caring one bit about the fragile little homestead family that had scraped itself together over the past 5 days. Clara's mind drifted to the mother who stashed her baby girls under those wagon floorboards. She chewed on what it meant to make a choice so heavy it cost you your life. She wasn't sure she completely grasped that yet. Not quite, anyway, but the truth was dawning on her. That blanket was still wrapped around her shoulders when she stumbled on the second note. She wasn't hunting for secrets. She was just digging through Silas's dusty coat again, the heavy one he'd used to swaddle those babies, figuring she needed to scrub it clean. She just wanted to check the pockets one last time before she dunked the rough wool into the wash water. That first scrap of paper, the one bearing his name, she had already tucked away, but buried deep down inside an inner pocket, one sewn shut, then carefully sliced back open with a blade, sat a folded paper square wrapped tight in a piece of oiled cloth. She nearly left it alone. It wasn't her business. She opened it anyway. It was a letter penned in a woman's neat, careful hand. The kind of refined prairie schooling practiced so long. It just flowed right onto the page like pure instinct. The date scratched up top was 11 days ago. It read, "To whoever finds my daughters." Clara sank straight to those kitchen floorboards, reading it over twice. That brave mother's name was June Calloway. She penned it at the river crossing during her last good hour, she wrote, while her husband and the other pioneers still held the line on watch. By then, she already knew their defense was going to break. She detailed the outlaws who hit them, their numbers, the direction they rode in from. She even described horse brands tied to a vicious gang she wouldn't name, only sketched in words. She wrote about hiding her girls. She laid out her hopes for them, assuming they survived the raid. No grand pioneer dreams, just simple things. She wanted the sisters to know each other. She prayed they'd have enough food. And if it wasn't too much to ask, this brutal world, she just wanted someone to show them a little kindness. It finished off with their true names, Eleanor and May. Clara just sat there on those hard floorboards for a spell, holding that paper tight. Those little girls were resting in the sitting room. She could hear their tiny noises, that steady, quiet hum of babies just being alive in this harsh land. Breathing, shuffling around, sometimes crying out, a little fuss to absolutely no one at all. Eleanor and May. She'd been calling them Rose and Wren for 5 days. Stick with me here. Those sweet names she'd invented meant nothing now. She folded the tragic letter back up and placed it gently on the table. She would hand it straight over to Nathan Hale. It was cold, hard evidence, a dying declaration holding details about those ruthless outlaws that the local lawmen desperately needed. Clara understood all of that clear as day, but sitting on that cold floor, she also knew in her bones that June Calloway penned those desperate words while shoving her babies under dusty floorboards. While gunmen circled outside, that mother used her final breathing moments to beg this unforgiving frontier to be kind to her girls. And the world, in its typically cruel and completely random way, had dropped that final plea onto a Nebraska ranch widow. A woman already failing to guard her own aching heart from 2 orphans she'd known barely a week. Then heavy bootsteps hit the wooden porch. Silas was back. He dragged inside through the back door she had propped open for the prairie breeze. He was definitely moving a fair bit easier today, acting less like a broken man counting his fresh wounds, and more like a tough survivor figuring out how to push forward despite the pain. That bad shoulder still kept his left side stiff, but he had been out working the barn. The scent of sweet hay and the dirt he brushed off his denim gave him away. He caught her look. "What happened?" he asked. She just handed him the letter. He read the whole thing standing there. She watched his jaw clench up hard halfway through, staying locked tight like a vice, until he finally folded that tragic paper shut. He laid it down softly on the rough wood, right beside her. "June," he muttered, testing the name out, weighing that simple word against the absolute slaughter he had witnessed down at the bloody river crossing. "Their given names are Eleanor and May. A dark shadow flashed across his face. I didn't look close enough, he confessed quietly. At the family Bible, I really should have. You were dodging bullets to save 2 babies, she said. You looked close enough. He stared hard at that oiled cloth. She knew a rider was coming, wrote it for anyone who found them, but it was me. It was you. Clara anchored him. He fell silent for a good long while. He grabbed his tin cup, gripping it tight with both hands, even though it was dry. He just needed a chore for his rough hands. Outside, the morning kept right on moving without them. Just yard birds and a lonely wind moving through the wild prairie grass. Picture this, a blazing Nebraska summer morning, going about its ordinary business, dead blind to the heavy truth resting right there on that kitchen table. Nathan needs to see it, Silas finally grumbled. I know. I'll send word today. He offered a stiff nod, glancing toward the parlor where young May was making a fuss. The infant was officially May now, even if Clara wouldn't. Say the name aloud, presently working through her usual morning fuss. Silas set his tin cup down hard. I'm heading out to mend that east fence, he muttered. Saw 2 posts yesterday that the winter wind will take if they ain't fixed. Clara shot him a hard look. You can't use that ruined shoulder for heavy labor. I ain't going to use that shoulder. I'll just use the good one and complain about it. Clara's mouth twitched into something near a smile. Almost. Tools are out in the barn, she said. Left side, second shelf. He tipped his hat and walked out. Clara sat there at the table, just listening to his boots crunch across the dusty yard. Then she finally stood, walking over to fetch May from the parlor. The child had moved past whimpering into a full-blown holler, making her downright displeasure with the whole frontier world known. Eleanor, she whispered to the quiet one. The name fit perfectly, and Clara absolutely hated that fact. Sheriff Nathan Hale rode in the very next morning, trailing a greenhorn deputy Clara had never seen. The kid looked young and jumpy, carrying the uncertain air of a man still wondering if wearing a tin star suited him. The sheriff read the paper at the table while Silas kept watch by the window, and Clara sat quietly across from the lawman. Finishing up, he laid the paper down with the slow, heavy care of a man needing a long second before speaking his mind. She detailed the horses. Saw that, the sheriff muttered. Silas chimed in. That brand she mentioned sounds like a double bar R notched on the left. I've seen that iron, Nathan replied. His voice was careful. Way too careful. The guarded tone of a man weighing exactly what secrets to spill. There's an outfit north of the Platte. They push hands through the territory moving beef. It's honest business, on paper, sure. But the drifters they hire ain't exactly what I'd call lawful. You know who's running it? Silas stated flatly. I got a name I'm tracking. That ain't an answer, Silas fired back. Nathan held his gaze hard. It's the only answer I have right now, Boon. Prairie justice takes time. You ride in blazing accusations without proof. You'll just spook the herd and we'll lose their tracks completely. Silas looked sour, but he also carried the weathered look of a man who respected cold logic, even when it tasted bitter. He faced the window again. What do I do with everything I saw? He asked. Write it down, Nathan ordered. Every tiny detail, every direction, every outlaw you laid eyes on. My deputy here will collect your sworn statement today, and we'll build our case from there. The young deputy fished out a notepad, glancing nervously between them, like he didn't know when to start scribbling. What about the girls? Clara finally asked. Nathan met her eyes. Sent word back east to the Callaways. That's the husband's blood. Found records of a cousin out in Ohio. No reply yet. The wife's sister down in Kansas I'm still hunting for. He paused. It just takes time, Clara. I understand that perfectly, she said, her voice dead level. But while time passes, these orphans are officially your problem. I filed the custody paperwork 3 days back. He studied her face closely. Is that going to cause a problem? No, she answered. He held her stare a beat longer than needed. then gave a slow nod. He peered at the wicker basket by the window, where Eleanor and May were simply existing loudly and without a lick of apology, and his hardened face softened up. "They sure look healthy," he muttered. "Getting there," Clara replied softly. "Now stick with me, because this is where the trail gets dark." Silas spent 2 hours talking to the law, sitting at that table while Clara listened through the wall. His voice was cold, precise, reporting the massacre. The man had an ironclad memory. Clara had always noticed that. He recalled things the way a man remembers a bad brand, like the details were burned permanently into his mind. After the lawman rode out, Silas sat frozen at the table. Clara stepped in, carrying 2 cups of black coffee she hadn't really needed to brew, setting a hot mug right down in front of him. "How much did you leave out?" she asked. He slowly looked up. "What makes you think I hid anything?" "You went dead silent 3 different times while I was listening through the boards." "You picked the tale back up, but you hesitated first." He stared deep into his coffee. "There was a young boy," he finally confessed. 16 at most, out from the wagon train. The riders had left him breathing, tied hard to a wagon wheel. He choked up. "I cut him loose." Boy couldn't speak. I ain't sure if it was pure shock, or if those devils had done something terrible to his throat. Kid passed away 3 hours later. He stopped again. "I hid it from the deputy because I don't know what that boy witnessed, and I don't know if it helps catch them, and I—" He trailed off again. Clara waited in silence. "I stayed beside him," Silas muttered, "until he died. You and I both know the guilt a man carries out here. I stayed with him, found those baby girls, and just rode hard," he whispered, turning the tin cup. "Never even checked for other survivors. I should have searched those wrecked wagons better. But I held the girls, and the boy was dead, so I ran." "Gather round, friends. You might not have found anyone alive," Clara said. "I know. And if you'd stayed searching every pioneer, Wagon Night would have caught you out there." "I know that too. But knowing it doesn't fix a thing," she told him. Silas just looked up at her. You could see something shift in the man's rugged face. Surprised, maybe, that she hadn't tried talking him down. "No," he muttered. "It doesn't. That is just how the frontier goes." She sat across from him. "You did your best." "Doing your best isn't doing everything. It is what it is." He fell quiet for a long spell. "The twins," he finally said. "Eleanor and May. Think there is kin out there who'll actually want them?" "I reckon there's kin who will claim them." "Whether that means the same thing," she shrugged. "And if there ain't—" Clara cast her eyes toward that little basket. Little May was wide awake, staring up at the ceiling boards, looking dead serious about whatever crossed her tiny mind. Eleanor slept soundly, her tiny fist shoved against her cheek. "Then we figure out what comes next," Clara told him. That word "we" slipped out naturally without thinking. She caught it a split second later, but didn't take it back. Silas heard it too. Clara could tell by how he didn't react. Out west, complete silence is its own kind of answer. Now, folks, the storms hit during week 2. Nebraska summers only had 2 temperatures, burning hot and trying to kill you. A 3-week heat wave cooking the territory finally broke that Tuesday afternoon. It was the exact kind of frontier storm that gave the Great Plains their ruthless reputation. It rolled down from the northwest, a sick, green-black sky. It dropped the heat 15 degrees in 20 minutes flat, slamming the homestead like something holding a bitter grudge. Clara got those windows securely latched and hurried the livestock inside before it arrived. Silas barred the heavy barn doors, then spent 20 dangerous minutes atop the outbuilding, hammer and nails in hand. He patched a weak timber roof section that had been threatening to cave since springtime. He bolted inside, soaking wet, the raging storm nipping at his boot heels. They stood together in the kitchen, listening to the tempest roar right over their heads. First came the hail, small and downright vicious rattling against the glass. Then the heavy rain. Finally, a howling prairie wind that made the whole cabin talk. Naturally, those twins hated the storm. Eleanor handled it by wailing in a steady, focused rhythm like she was pacing herself for a long battle. May just went completely dead silent, which was somehow far more terrifying. Little May just lay in her woven basket, eyes wide open, listening to the thunder with a look of pure, profound offense. "She looks like she is taking notes," Silas said. "I truly think she is." Clara kept up a steady back-patting rhythm for Eleanor, figuring out who to blame later. Silas scooped up May. He had gotten less stiff about holding her over the past week, less like a rugged cowboy handling fine china, and far more like a man who simply accepted that this was his life now. He took a seat in the chair right by the iron stove, easily the warmest spot in that drafty room. Silas held the baby against his broad chest. He spoke in that low, steady rumble that had calmed her since their first night. "It is just rain," he whispered. "It is mighty loud, but it means nothing. The storm rolls through, it ends, and the prairie air smells sweeter afterward. That is all it is." May stared up at him, unblinking and deeply skeptical. "I know," Silas muttered. "I don't love it either." Clara watched them from across the rustic kitchen. The oil lamp burned low, turned down tight to wait out the fierce lightning strikes. It was an old pioneer superstition her mother taught her about lamps attracting lightning. Probably pure nonsense, but survival habits die hard out west. In that dim, golden glow, Silas looked like he belonged in that kitchen forever. Like a sturdy oak table that had simply always been there. It was deeply unsettling, and yet somehow not unsettling at all. "Tell me a story," she said. "What kind of story?" "Anything. I am sick of listening to this storm." The cowboy thought a minute. "I was down in Abilene roughly 8 years back, working cattle just passing through. Found a hotel with a lobby piano. The fellow playing it was maybe 60, but his hands didn't match his ragged age. They moved exactly like a strong young man's hands grafted onto an old pioneer's wrists. He played every single evening from 6 to 9. Nobody ever told him to stop, and nobody ever asked him to keep going either. He just played." Silas glanced down at May. "I stayed 3 extra days just to hear him. I have no idea why I am sharing that." "What did he play?" Clara asked. "Never knew the names, just beautiful music." "Was it good?" "Best thing my ears had caught in years." Silas paused. "Maybe ever." Clara sat in pure silence for a while. Eleanor finally stopped her wailing, making those soft little noises that come right before sleep, mostly sleepy sighs, murmuring sounds that meant everything and nothing at all. Outside, the storm was finally easing up. Not gone, but past its worst. "My late husband used to whistle," Clara murmured. "Not real songs, just notes in a row while he worked the land. God, I found it irritating." She paused. "I would give a whole lot to hear it now." Silas didn't say a word to that, and she was mighty glad. You see, folks, there was nothing left to say. It was a harsh truth, and out here, sometimes true things just need to hang in the air before life moves forward. That storm broke past midnight. Both of them still sat in that kitchen. The morning took on a certain shape. Not an easy one, mind you, and surely not permanent. They both knew the score. Nathan kept hunting for next of kin, and those outlaws from the river crossing were still lurking out there. Nothing was settled, but you and I know how the frontier forces a rhythm on you, whether you ask for it or not. Silas beat her out of bed most mornings. The coffee was already boiling black when she emerged. He just quietly took over mending fences, fixing that north pasture gate that had been drooping since fall. Then he patched up the barn roof she had ignored since winter. He never bothered asking for a chore list. He just worked. He scouted around, found what was broken, and fixed it. Now that is either a blessing or mighty unsettling. Clara figured it was a blessing. She managed the cooking and those twin babies indoors. She had run this homestead solo for 2 years and could do it blindfolded. But things felt different now. She actually had another pair of hands to take a crying baby when hers went numb. Someone to mutter at over. Coffee at 5 in the morning after a rough night. Someone she could nudge and ask, "Did you hear that?" when one of those infants made a strange new noise. Because half the joy of raising young ones is having somebody there to notice it, too. Now Clara knew this arrangement was getting tangled. But she was too bone-tired for tangled, so she just pushed it deep down and carried on. Nathan finally forced her to face those facts, though he didn't exactly mean to. He rode out on a Thursday, 2.5 weeks after Silas showed up. Sat right there at her kitchen table, nursing his coffee. He laid out his report, explaining he was still tracking the late wife's sister. He had a lead on a cousin in Ohio who seemed interested. He was building a solid case against that northern outfit, but needed more solid proof. Then, staring straight at his mug, he muttered, "People in town are talking." Clara froze solid. "About what?" "About you having a man living on the property," Nathan replied. Clara just stared at him. "I know," Nathan said. "I know, but you asked me to tell you things as they were, not as they ought to be." "What are they saying?" "Nothing that technically matters, just that Widow Whitmore has a drifter staying out there with 2 babies. He paused. "People fill in what they don't know." Clara shot a glance at Silas. He was staring hard at the table, trying his absolute best to keep his face completely deadpan. "That's their business," Clara fired back. "It is. I'm just telling you." Nathan drained his cup. "It's a mighty small territory, Clara. Folks talk. If a judge looks into custody for these girls, any weird details about your living arrangements will get dragged into the light." After Nathan rode off, those two just sat dead quiet for a long minute. "I can. Sleep out in the barn," Silas finally offered. "You're not sleeping in the barn?" "It wouldn't bother me." "I know it wouldn't bother you. That is completely beside the point." She rubbed her tired eyes. "The point is, it's ridiculous." "It is," he agreed. "But that lawman ain't wrong about how it looks." Clara lowered her hands and locked eyes with him. "Stick with me here." He stared right back, steady as a rock. And Clara finally saw, really saw, that the man had kind, honest eyes. He wasn't some polished town dandy. He was just present, grounded, looking right at her instead of drifting off into his own thoughts. "I'll think about it," she whispered. "All right." Now she either didn't think on it at all or agonized over it endlessly. Same result either way. What she truly chewed on was June Calloway, the woman who penned a dying letter begging the whole world to show her baby girls some mercy. She thought deep about little Eleanor, who was barely 7 weeks into this rugged life, and had just figured out her own hand was a fascinating thing, staring at her tiny fingers with the serious focus of an old schoolteacher. She thought about May, the one who bawled for 20 solid minutes every evening at sundown for no earthly reason Clara could ever figure out, and then went quiet as fast as she started, falling fast asleep with the pure peace of someone who spoke their peace. She remembered surviving 2 bitter winters all by her lonesome. She recalled her late husband's constant whistling, those tuneless melodies he'd make while chopping wood. She used to find it grating, but, Lord, she would give absolutely anything to hear it today. She thought on a man who rode 34 grueling miles on a fading horse, acting on rumors, with 2 strangers' babies strapped to his chest, refusing to yield even when he was completely blacked out, because deep down in his bones, long before logic kicked in, he already knew that letting go just wasn't in his nature. That was a special kind of man. She had learned that kind was downright rare. The evening Silas finally spilled the whole bloody tale was when she realized just how rare. They were resting out on the porch after the babies were asleep, a quiet ritual they fell into without ever speaking a word about it. The evening air had finally cooled off enough to be comfortable, and the stars hung thick and low. You and I know that prairie sky. It makes you feel sheltered under a heavy roof, rather than lost outside. "Pull up a chair, friend." He just started talking unprompted, told her about reaching that river crossing, hitting that terrible smell. A stench he recognized before seeing a single thing. One that told him the whole grim story about combing through that wreckage piece by piece. Because out here, you either take action or you do not. Told her about finding the boy and staying by his side. Then came June. He found her sprawled face down over a hidden hatch right there in the wagon floor. He almost moved her without thinking just to check. But some deep instinct made him look first. Staring at her face, the hard truth hit him. He realized she had positioned her body exactly like that on purpose. She had draped herself across that hatch while she still possessed the dying strength to do it, and she held that line. She pressed her cheek right against the wood, he whispered, just to hear them. To know if they were still, he choked up. She wanted their voices to be the very last thing she heard. Clara stayed silent. "I found a decent spot," he muttered. "Up on a high ridge overlooking the river." I laid her down. I buried all of them I could find. The boy, too. He just stared at his calloused hands. I do not know if any of it matters. It felt like it should. "It matters," Clara said. "I keep thinking I should have been faster, or done more, or... Silas." He paused. "You hauled those girls 34 miles when you could barely sit a horse. You sat with a dying boy when you could have ridden on. You buried strangers because you believed a man's resting place matters." She locked eyes with him. What exactly would doing more even look like? The cowboy stayed silent for a long spell. "I do not know," he finally confessed. "Neither do I." She looked back at the stars. Out here, that usually means you have done enough. You simply cannot figure out what more to give. He let out a slow breath. The heavy tension in his shoulders dropped a full inch. They sat on that porch for another hour, barely speaking. And that was plenty. Down inside the house, Eleanor and May slept soundly in a basket that was getting mighty cramped. Clara knew she would have to build or trade for a real cradle soon. And that massive prairie night went on being endless quiet and completely indifferent to human sorrow. Just like it always is. But right here on this weathered wooden porch, it did not feel like indifference. Now you and I know the plains change things. It felt like space for something new. Then a letter from Ohio arrived on Friday. Clara was working the dusty yard when the local supply rider brought it out. Barely 13 years old. He rode for 3 different ranches across the territory. He handled his duties with a grit most grown men lacked. He handed over the envelope in absolute silence, tipped the brim of his hat, and spurred his horse back out the gate. She stood under the sun staring hard at the return address. Ashcraft Oft V, Cincinnati, Ohio. She carried the letter inside, laid it flat on the rough wooden table, and just studied it a long while before opening it. The handwriting was nothing like June Calloway's gentle school-taught script. This ink was bold and commanding, the letters leaning forward like a stampeding herd rushing to get somewhere fast. The sender introduced herself as Vivian Ashcraft-Toft, born Calloway, the older sister of Thomas Calloway, the man who had fathered little Eleanor and May. She claimed she caught wind of the tragedy from Sheriff Hale's office, offering her absolute deepest sympathies. Then, driving forward like a runaway stagecoach without catching her breath, she declared that she intended to ride out to Nebraska, claim her nieces, and drag them back east for a proper, civilized upbringing. She never bothered asking if the timing suited anyone. She certainly never asked if it was what the girls wanted. She simply named her arrival date exactly 3 weeks out and demanded a quick confirmation that the children would be packed for travel. Clara read the whole thing twice. Then she folded the paper, locked it in her drawer with the important ranch deeds, and stepped back out to finish her chores. She kept her mouth shut around Silas until sundown after the babies were asleep and the 2 of them had settled onto the porch. She just handed the cowboy the letter in dead silence. He read it by the fading sunlight, then read it again. "Ready for travel," he muttered. "Yep, that is what it says." He handed the page back. She watched the storm brewing in him, the hard set of his jaw, the way he glared out at that dark prairie skyline like the land owed him a blood debt. Does Nathan know? Not yet. I will send word tomorrow. And what does Nathan think about the legal claim? I do not know yet. She folded the letter. Blood relations hold a mighty strong claim. That is just how the West works. She has never met them. The law does not care. He went quiet. The evening air hung warm, smelling like the prairie grass had finally surrendered its green and started the long, dusty fade into winter gold. The dry end of summer was creeping in around the edges. "What do you aim to do?" Silas asked. She stared down at the crisp letter in her hands. "I need to find out exactly who this woman is before I make my move." It was the absolute truest answer she could give, and he clearly reckoned it was the only truth available because he did not push her. Between us, what Clara left unsaid, what she was not ready to admit to herself, trouble was. Clara had started seeing Eleanor and May as her own. Not by law or paper, just the way a body gets tethered to the very things giving their days meaning. The first thought hitting her mind come sunup, and the very last stock she checked before blowing out the lantern. She knew the exact sharp pitch of Eleanor's hunger wail against her weary whimpers. She knew little May could turn from sweet to furious faster than a lightning strike. And Eleanor was finally smiling, not bellyaches, but real genuine grins aimed at a face she loved. And friend, the very first time it happened. Clara stood dead still in that ranch kitchen for 10 solid seconds. Something deep inside her chest finally broke loose, something that hadn't stirred in 2 long years. None of this affection held up in court. A circuit judge wouldn't care. Clara knew the hard truth. She just stubbornly refused to let it matter quite yet. Vivian Ashcraft-Toft rolled up on a dusty Wednesday exactly 3 weeks after her letter hit, proving she was the sort of woman who kept her word and demanded the same from the world. She rode up in a hired rig from the rail depot 20 miles straight south. She had dispatched a second note ahead to lock down their plans. Clara read that note twice, hunting for warmth, but finding winter. Clara and Silas stood waiting in the yard when the buggy approached. Clara planned that united front, though she never breathed a word. She wanted Silas standing tall. She needed it painfully clear this homestead had protectors. Vivian stepped down from that rig with the slick, practiced ease of high society folks always boarding or leaving fine carriages. She looked to be 50, with dark hair fading to silver along her temples. She possessed a face that was once frontier pretty, but had weathered into something far more striking. Dressed sharp, mind you, not flashy, but wearing the kind of quiet quality that costs serious coin without shouting it. She judged the whole spread with eyes like flat stones. Then she locked onto Clara. "Mrs. Whitmore," she stated flatly, no question mark attached. "Miss Ashcraft-Toft." Clara offered a hand, and Vivian took it with a dry, iron grip. "And this here is Silas Boon, the very man who tracked down your nieces." Vivian slowly turned her gaze to Silas, sizing the cowpoke up in a way that was sharply measuring but never exactly impolite. "I hear I owe you my thanks for pulling those babies out of that mess alive." "I just did what I could," Silas rumbled. "Your modesty is duly noted." She pivoted right back toward the cabin. "I would very much like to see the girls." Now it sure wasn't a polite request, but it wasn't a barked order either. It hovered right in that tense middle ground where Clara figured this wealthy aunt lived her entire life. She led the woman inside. Eleanor and May lay in the main cabin, resting in the sturdy wooden cradle Silas built 3 weeks back to retire the old wash basket. Took him 4 days of sweating, and the carpentry wasn't exactly his finest. Silas admitted that much. But it held tight fit perfect, and he had sanded every rough edge smooth as river glass. The infant twins were wide awake. Little Eleanor was busy studying her own fist again, a serious little project she had been wrapped up in for a fortnight. May was dozing with her eyes half open, a spooky habit Clara decided was best ignored. Vivian froze right there on the threshold. She stared at the little orphans a good long while, frozen. Clara studied her face carefully, bracing for an incoming storm. She just didn't know what kind. Maybe the rich lady snatching up the closest baby and declaring they were leaving tomorrow. Something to draw the battle lines, but what she actually witnessed was a whole lot tougher to brace against. Picture this with me. Vivian Ashcraft-Toft, standing in a Nebraska cabin, staring down at her dead brother's little girls. A shadow crossed her face that was mighty private and painfully real. Raw grief tore through a proud woman who swore never to show it, and for just a few flickering seconds, she was losing the war. Then she stood tall, stepped forward, and squatted by the cradle with a smooth grace, proving her joints were better than Clara's. "Hello," she whispered softly, spoken to both of them, to neither of them, just tossed into the air. Eleanor slowly turned her tiny head toward the noise. May's half-open eyes drifted aimless. Vivian never reached in. She simply looked. After a minute, she rose. "They look mighty healthy," she stated. Her voice was flat, businesslike almost. "They are eating right well," Clara shot back. "Eleanor's actually heavy for her age." May is right on the money. Vivian turned slowly. "You know which twin is which." "I do." How Eleanor bears a little mark behind her left ear. May hollers every evening from 7 to 8, then sleeps like a rock. Something twitched at the edge of Vivian's mouth. Not quite a true smile. That sure sounds exactly like her mother. That was the very first mention of June. Clara held her tongue, knowing damn well there was no right way to answer that ghost. "I would like to bunk here a few days," Vivian said, "before anyone makes a permanent choice. I want to watch them understand the reality of this wild frontier adoption." Clara had armed herself for a bloody shootout, not a truce. "Well, friend," Clara nodded. "You are welcome to stay. Now let me tell you, those next 4 days were the strangest Clara had seen since Silas appeared at her gate. And that is saying plenty. Vivian was no easy woman. She held loud opinions, and she surely did not care about softening her words just to keep the parlor comfortable. She decided the ranch house got too cold come sundown, and said exactly that. She judged Clara's way of feeding those twins and quickly offered improvements. Out in the yard, she watched Silas work, eyeing him like a sum she had not quite solved. But she also rose right at 4 in the morning that second night. Without a single word, she took a screaming Eleanor, stood by the glass, and rocked that baby with practiced, steady grace. Clara stumbled out of her bedroom half asleep and froze right in the doorway. "I had children," Vivian stated without turning around. "Long ago. My husband passed when they were small. I know the 4 o'clock hour." Clara had no idea. She gathered May, and they stood at opposite windows, rocking in the dark, silent. Come the third day, Silas found Vivian inside the barn. He had walked out there to check the mare, who had favored her left front since Monday, and spotted the Cincinnati woman perched on a hay bale. Wearing her good dress face composed, she stared at nothing. He paused in the door. "You need something out here?" "I needed a moment," she answered. "Away from the house." He stepped inside and took a seat against the opposite wall. The mare watched them both. She had that patient, steady suspicion horses reserve for folks entering a barn for non-horse reasons. "You knew my sister-in-law?" Vivian stated. It was not a question. She had read the letter. Nathan shared it, or Clara did. Silas wasn't sure. "I knew of her," he replied. "What she did? I didn't know her." "She was stubborn," Vivian continued. "June always did things her own way, agreed or not. Thomas loved that spark, but it drove him mad in equal measure. She studied the dirt floor. I refused to attend their wedding. I believed Thomas made a mistake marrying such a willful woman." She paused. "I was wrong about that, wrong about quite a few things." Silas stayed silent. "Do you think they are happy out here?" she asked. "The girls." Silas just stared down at his rough hands. I figure they don't know enough yet to be happy or sad. They just know who feeds them, holds them, and speaks in the dark. He paused. They know Clara. Vivian stayed quiet a long spell. She loves them. Yes. And you? He looked up. Not accusing, she said. Observing. I am very good at observing. Her gaze held steady. What are your true intentions toward this household, Mr. Boon? Now you and I know folks out west might dodge a question like that for 6 months. Surprisingly, Silas didn't mind the bluntness one bit. Haven't worked that out entirely, he admitted. At least you're honest. I surely try. She nodded, slowly stood, and brushed her skirt with the brisk efficiency of a woman who never wasted motion. I expected a temporary deal. A neighbor keeping babies alive until family arrived. Yes. She stepped right toward the barn doors. That is not what I found. She strode into the afternoon sun, leaving Silas with the mare a few minutes before he finally followed. Real trouble hit before Vivian ever left. It rolled in Thursday evening, 6 days in. Trouble out on the frontier always arrives like that zero. Warning showing up at the absolute worst possible moment. Silas walked the yard after supper, handling his final check of the property before nightfall. It was his daily routine now. He paced the south fence line, tested the barn latch, and circled back around the east corner of the house. Daylight was dying fast. The sky bled purple and orange, just like it always does in those final 20 minutes before blackness hits. He spotted a lone rider on the ridge maybe a quarter mile out, just sitting and watching. Silas hid in the shadows, staring right back. That rider never twitched, did not approach, just sat on the ridge in the dying light, looking down at the homestead. After 3 minutes, the rider turned north. Silas went inside and stayed completely silent through supper. Vivian was there, and there was no sense spooking her over something he hadn't fully figured out yet. But once Vivian retired to her room, he warned Clara. She stood in the kitchen and quietly heard his report. Could be anybody, she muttered, but her wavering tone proved she did not believe that at all. Could be, he agreed. But he was studying this house, not just riding through. What is our next move? I'll ride out to Hale come daybreak. Tonight, keep that rifle right where you can reach it. Clara nodded. She didn't argue about the gun, meaning she'd sensed the danger too. Meanwhile, Nathan rode up before Silas could leave. You and I know what that means, meeting on the road. Meant he had bad news, and refused to speak it inside the town office. So they all stood in that kitchen, Nathan, Silas, Clara, and Vivian. Let us step right into this Western tale. Clara held her ground, watching the sheriff ride up. We have a problem, Nathan said, setting his hat down. I've been building a case against the Double Bar R outfit for 3 weeks. That boss I mentioned before? His name is Cutter Vane. He's worked this rough territory for 2 years, hiding behind a livestock operation. Moving cattle, sure, but smuggling plenty else, too. Nathan locked eyes with Silas. He knows you survived that river crossing. Silas stayed completely motionless. He knows you found those girls, Nathan added. He knows your location. How? Clara asked. Town talks, Silas muttered quietly. Nathan just nodded. I am truly sorry. I should have considered that much sooner. Somebody blabbed about a cowboy at the Whitmore ranch hauling in 2 orphan babies. Word traveled much faster than I ever expected. He glanced right at Clara. That rider you spotted last night was likely a scout. Vane stayed out of jail for 2 years, by never leaving living witnesses. Vivian finally broke her silence. You mean to say these killers are heading here? I am saying they might, Nathan replied grimly. That is exactly why I rode out. I want you all safely in town. No, Silas stated flatly. Everyone stared right at him. Taking them into town puts them out on the open road, he argued. If Vane spots a slow wagon hauling 2 infants, they become dead easy targets. Out here we have thick walls, clear sightlines, and solid cover. He eyed Nathan. How many good men do you actually trust? Nathan studied him hard. 3 solid deputies I would bet my own life on. Maybe 2 tough ranchers east of here. Bring them tonight if possible. Silas turned back to Clara. How many hired hands can you rally by morning? 2, she answered. She watched the cowboy with a tight expression he could not quite figure out. It definitely was not fear. It was more like she finally saw something crystal clear after squinting at it sideways for weeks on end. And my neighbor Denton will ride over if I send word. That makes 8 shooters total, Silas said. Against how many men in Vane's posse? Best estimate is 6 hard men riding with him regularly, Nathan answered. Maybe more. He will not bring the whole crew, Silas countered. Not for an open prairie ranch. He will send a small, quiet group, and he will fully expect the element of surprise to be his. He locked eyes with Nathan. Let us take that away from him. Vivian made a sharp noise, almost laughing. You have done this before, she noted. Done what? Flipped a bad ambush before it could swallow you. She studied him. You know exactly how this game works. I know how some things go, he muttered. Clara quickly sent for Denton, while Nathan spurred his horse hard toward town to grab those deputies. Here is where you and I watch a survivor prepare. Silas spent the fading daylight pacing the ranch boundary twice, stopping at every corner to calculate firing lines. He studied all the approach angles, guessing exactly where a mounted gunman would naturally drift from in the pitch black. The man had spent decades surviving dangerous frontier country. He knew exactly how violent bushwhackers planned their midnight attacks. Those ranch hands showed up before midnight. Nathan's deputies finally rode in at 1 a.m, looking exhausted and severely grim. Denton eventually arrived from the east. He was a massive, silent man in his 60s, a steadfast neighbor ever since Clara's late husband first broke ground. He showed up carrying a heavy rifle alongside 2 boxes of shells, grunted maybe 4 words total, and figured that was plenty. Vivian tucked those innocent twins into Clara's center bedroom, keeping them safely away from any stray bullets or shattered windows. She took a chair beside the wooden cradle for the rest of the night, unprompted. Clara found her standing guard right there at 2 a.m. You should sleep, Clara whispered softly. You should stop telling folks things they simply won't do, Vivian shot back. Clara sank onto the edge of the mattress. For a fleeting second, they were just 2 weary women in a shadowed room guarding sleeping orphans, while the homestead sat dead quiet, and outside, hard men crouched in defensive positions, gripping loaded rifles. And the vast western night simply did what it always does, stretching on, slow and massive, completely careless of the desperate human struggles breathing beneath it. If something bad happens to me, Clara started, then hesitated. Nothing bad is going to happen to you, Vivian promised firmly. I am not being morbid, I am just being practical. Clara stared down into the cradle. If I fall tonight, you must know little Eleanor needs slow, rhythmic patting, and May prefers being held totally still while you softly talk to her. They desperately need those specific comforts, or they will not sleep. Vivian looked at her hard. Her tight expression finally softened. I know, she murmured. I have been watching closely. Clara simply nodded. She stepped back into the main room, finding Silas posted by the front window. She walked over and stood right beside his shoulder. Outside, the wild prairie lay dark, flat, and silent. Heavy stars above. No moonlight yet. How long? She asked into the darkness. Could be tonight. Could be tomorrow. He never once moved from the glass. Could be he decides this ranch ain't worth dying for, but I seriously doubt he decides that. Why not? Because I am the only breathing soul left from that bloody river, crossing who can identify his smuggling operation. Every week I survive, I might testify before a federal judge. He took a long pause. He has to come. She studied his rugged profile against the pitch-black window pane. You and I have met Westerners like this before. The tense jaw, the broad shoulders possessing a permanent stillness, like staying calm was a heavy choice he made, every single breath. "Silas," she said, "whatever happens tonight." She paused, then tried again. "I need you to know. Riding those 34 miles, staying with that boy, burying total strangers." She locked eyes with him in the dark. "June Calloway prayed the world would show her daughters some kindness. And the world sent you. I reckon she'd want to know that." He turned from that window, studying her in the shadows. She could see his weathered face just fine, watching a heavy emotion sweep over his features that he didn't even try hiding. "Clara, don't say a word. Just hold on to it." He stayed dead silent for a minute. "Let me tell you, out here you hear trouble first." Hoofbeats echoed from the north. 2 riders, then a third, creeping slow with that dead silence of outlaws who thought they had the drop. Silas stepped back from the glass, not saying a single thing. Their defensive perimeter held tight. Nathan's lawmen covered the north angle, while Denton and the ranch hands locked down the east and west. Silas took the front door. "Now you and I both know how saloon tales go, but the next 20 minutes weren't clean, quick, or pretty like those dime novel shootouts. It was just blinding noise, pitch blackness, and the sheer brutal chaos of a firefight blowing up in every direction. 2 of Vane's thugs hit the dirt before even crossing the fence line pinned down by deputies returning fire. A third drifter rushed the porch. Silas met him right there in the doorway. It was an ugly, desperate scramble. Silas stumbled away from the scuffle with something busted on his left side. Broken ribs, maybe worse. He couldn't quite tell yet. The 4th outlaw bolted. Silas chased him on foot for 50 yards until he finally admitted his broken body wasn't going to make the run. He stopped cold. He stood out in that dark pasture, gasping for air. He listened to the galloping hoofbeats fade north, then turned back. The ranch house glowed with lamplight, showing nervous movement inside. He limped back, clamping one arm against his ribs. Reaching the porch, he gripped the wooden frame and just leaned there for a minute. Not frightened, just needing to catch his damn breath. Clara pulled the heavy door open herself. She studied his pained face and the arm clutching his side. "How bad?" she asked. "I don't think it's the dying kind of bad," he muttered, "but it hurts like hell." She stepped aside to let him pass. He collapsed into that left kitchen chair, his usual spot. She knelt right on the floorboards, working his bloody shirt buttons loose to see what kind of mess hid underneath. "The girls," he grunted. "Safe. Vivian's watching them." "Nathan's fine too." Deputy Marsh took a nasty graze to his arm. "Denton is just mad about a busted fence." She froze at the purple bruising, looking up at him. "It's your ribs." "Yeah, 2, I reckon. Maybe 3. Can you tape them up?" "I've done this before." She grabbed the clean bandages. He slumped in that chair, shirt hanging open, letting her pull the binding tight. He tried drawing whatever shallow breath his cracked ribs allowed, which, frankly, wasn't nearly enough. "You dropped that gun on the porch," she noted, while rapping. "He's out there breathing. He'll sing for the sheriff." "What about Vane?" Didn't show his own face. "Sent hired guns." He winced. That means the coward will try again. Or it means Nathan finally has the evidence to drag him in. He mulled that over. "Ain't no maybe about it," Nathan declared from the threshold. Clara and Silas both glanced over. Nathan was coated in trail dust, sporting another man's blood on his sleeve, but standing tall. His rugged face wore the closest thing to a triumphant grin Clara had ever witnessed. "One of those rustlers outside is squealing already, begging to make a plea deal. He's serving up Vane's hideout, his whole operation, the works." He nodded at Silas. "We'll string him up by dawn." Silas let that massive news sink in. He accepted it real slow-like, trusting a fragile rope bridge you're dead scared to walk across. "Good," he grunted. "Ribs?" Nathan asked. "Ribs," Silas confirmed. The lawman just nodded, stepping back out into the dirt to handle the grim aftermath. Clara finished the makeshift bandage. She pulled the final knot tight, sat back on her boots, and stared at him. He held her gaze. That little kitchen felt warm, the lantern blazing awfully bright compared to the prairie night. Meanwhile, back in the bedroom, Vivian kept murmuring to the twins in a soft, lullaby whisper, too quiet to catch the exact words. Just the steady, comforting rhythm of a protector standing guard. "You need to sleep," Clara whispered. "You do too." "I'm checking on the girls first. I'll hold down the fort." She stood up, resting a calloused hand on his sore shoulder. Not nursing him, just a quiet, heavy comfort. Then she drifted down the dark timbered hallway toward the bedroom. Now, if you've ever survived a night like that, you know the feeling. He sat, breathing shallow, staring at ordinary log walls, realizing this remote homestead was the most unexpected sanctuary he'd ever found. He was still glued to that chair when dawn finally broke. And old Nathan kept his promise. Come mid-morning, the sheriff rode out with 2 deputies and Denton's strapping oldest boy, a kid who knew the harsh northern territory better than any scout around. Meanwhile, that bleeding gun on the porch, the drifter Silas Flattened had spent 2 hours sweating under Nathan's relentless interrogation. And whatever he spit out was apparently damn well enough. "Come with me to the territory." Nathan rode out hard and dragged Cutter Vane back in irons before twilight, plus 2 rustlers they flushed out from a camp 12 miles north. Those boys didn't put up a fuss once they saw the guns were drawn, and the odds were dead against them. Silas got the news from a kitchen chair. He'd been anchored there all day on Clara's strict orders, and his busted ribs told him she was dead right to keep him seated. Nathan stepped inside real quick to deliver the news. He hovered in the doorway, twisting his brim in his hands like he always did, and spelled out exactly what they uncovered out at that camp. They found proof of the river racket, a wagon full of plundered goods, and an actual ledger. Vane kept written records, a mix of pure arrogance and frontier stupidity, if you ask Nathan. "He's going to hang," Nathan said flatly. No joy in his voice. Just the cold truth of a man who'd ridden this rugged country long enough to know the brutal fate waiting for outlaws who pushed their luck and got caught. "Ledger proves the river operation?" Silas asked. "Proves plenty," Nathan replied, "especially paired with your sworn word and the letter June Calloway left behind." "That's right." Nathan held his gaze. "You'll need to ride into town and sign a formal statement when you're fit enough. No rush, but the law needs it." "I'll be there," Silas swore. Nathan nodded, eyeing those battered ribs. "How bad?" "Manageable. He's lying," Clara called out from the stove, never turning around. "I'm not. Just softening the truth." Nathan let out a low grunt that passed for a chuckle in these parts. He pulled his hat low. "I'll see myself on out." Once he rode off, the kitchen drifted back into its familiar quiet rhythm. Wood popping in the stove, twins fussing nearby, and prairie wind whistling through window cracks. Silas still needed to patch. Vivian was sitting with the little ones, had been in there since dawn. The muffled noises through the timber were just the clumsy sounds of a woman figuring out 2 stubborn little babes. Clara listened to her, slowly finding the exact rocking rhythm that calmed Eleanor down, and that steady, low whisper little May always needed. Silas shifted in his timber chair, stifling a sharp groan in his throat. "Stop twitching," Clara warned. "I wasn't. You were. Hold still." He froze, staring up at the rough wooden beams. "They'll heal up in a week. You and I know frontier medicine. It gets worse tomorrow before it gets better. I know busted ribs. Then stop acting shocked when they hurt." She stepped over and slid a hot ironstone plate right in front of him, keeping it warm over the fire all this time. "Eat." He stared at the grub, then met her eyes. "You've fed me for 6 straight weeks. You've mended fences and patched the barn for 6 weeks. We're square." "That's not..." He paused, staring down at the hot food. "Much obliged, Clara." She'd already spun back toward the hot iron stove, so he couldn't read her expression, and she was thankful for that. Truth is, she didn't know what her own face was showing, and she needed a quiet second to mask it from the world. The dusty room stayed silent a long while. "Vivian handles those babies well," she finally muttered. "Yeah," he agreed, staring at the wood planks, listening to the muffled noise. She caught me off guard. That woman surprises me every single day. Clara dragged a chair across the floor. No supper for her, just rough hands wrapped around a tin coffee mug. She told me about her late husband and her kids. Her youngest boy passed from a prairie fever at age 4. Silas froze completely. She doesn't share that tale easily. Clara murmured softly. But she told me she rode out west expecting to find 2 stranded orphans living in a temporary mess. She figured she was just riding in to scoop them up and haul them back to civilization. Clara stared down into her black coffee. She said she never expected to find a place that already felt like a true home. The quiet that settled over them weighed a ton. Not awkward, just thick with the unspoken truth they'd been dancing around for weeks in that cabin. "What does she want?" he asked, stepping careful, like the words were barbed wire. "I don't know yet. I reckon she's still working it through." Clara raised her eyes. She asked me at dawn what I officially wanted for those girls. "What did you tell her?" "I told her I plan to adopt them." She spoke it steady and true, just like she'd been rehearsing the words in her mind for 3 agonizing days. I said I knew she held a lawful claim, and I'd never ask her to surrender it without knowing exactly what kind of life she was trading it for, but I made my intentions known. Silas studied her face for a long, quiet stretch, and she didn't reject the idea. Clara kept spinning the tin cup. Didn't say yes, though. Said she needed to chew on it. He nodded real slow. "And you?" she asked. "What do you want for their future?" The question hung heavy in the frontier cabin. He stared right at her across that wooden table. "Let's look close here. No more sideways glances." He gave her a direct, steady stare, anchored by a tough choice he'd made and intended to keep. "You know what I truly want," he murmured. "I want to hear you say it." He stayed dead silent for a beat. "I want to stay," he rasped, assuming there's still room for me here. "There is plenty of room," she said. Her tone never wavered. Her rough hands on the cup stayed perfectly still. "There's always been room." He held her gaze for another long stretch, and she finally exhaled. He looked back. Now, you and I know those quiet frontier exchanges. It was a look needing no words. Mighty lucky, since neither had any left. Then he just stared at his plate, picking up his fork, while she turned back to the iron stove. And that old kitchen just stayed a kitchen. Warm, plain, smelling of hearty grub and kerosene lamps, mixed with that faint, clean prairie breeze slipping through the window gap from the evening air outside. Vivian made up her mind 4 mornings after Vane got locked up. She stepped in for breakfast. She'd been doing that slipping into the homestead chores unasked. Clara had surely noticed and tucked that detail away. She sat, waiting till the coffee poured and those twin babies settled down. Eleanor riding Clara's knee, May rocking in the wooden cradle right close. She folded her hands on that timber table, needing to talk. Clara agreed. "I came here," Vivian said, "with a strict plan. I've always had my plans. Operating without a map comes mighty hard. The goal was to judge this setup, prove it was temporary and poor. Nothing personal at all. I just figured I'd give Thomas's little girls a right proper upbringing. Real schooling, society, solid money. Things my Cincinnati life could offer that a rough Nebraska ranch simply couldn't." She stared hard at her hands. "I'll shoot straight with you. I was terribly lonely too. My own kids are gone. My husband's been in the ground 14 years. My brother, his wife, the frontier life they built. That's all dust now." She raised her eyes. "I wanted something waiting back home. I wanted them." Clara stayed quiet. Silas held his tongue. "But wanting a thing," Vivian went on, "don't mean it's rightfully yours." The cabin was so hushed you could hear little Eleanor chewing on Clara's thumb, a brand new habit. That first tooth coming in was loud and clear. "I watched you," Vivian said. "You folks know that judging gaze. For 4 whole days I watched you. knowing exactly what these babies need, waking at 4 in the morning without a lick of anger just because the chore demands it. The way you... She paused. How you talk to them, nodding like they're grown folks already, like they've been real people right from the start. She paused. June would have done it just so. Clara's throat swallowed hard, though her face stayed like stone. And you, Vivian told Silas. I watched you too. You didn't do what most rough men would have done back at that river crossing. Most fellas would have rode into town, dumped the burden on strangers, and figured their hands were clean. She locked eyes with him, but you carried them. You kept them safe, brought them here trusting your pioneer gut about who'd truly care for them. And your gut was dead right. She eyed them both. These little ones know your voices. They know your calloused hands. They know how this cabin smells and sounds. You can't just pack that up. Drag it to Cincinnati and call it an upgrade. That silence stretched mighty long. What are you saying? Clara asked, treading real careful. She dreaded getting her hopes up just to be dead wrong. I'm saying... Vivian spoke slow, laying words like heavy stones. I'll drop my custody claim completely and legally. She held Clara's steady gaze. If you'll let me stay. Clara stared at her. Stay? Not forever. I ain't looking to squat in your house. Got my life in Cincinnati, but I want to be in theirs. A real blood aunt, not just ink on paper. I want to visit for Christmas, spend summers, be here through the bitter winters and bountiful harvests. She stopped. Thomas was my brother. They're his only living legacy. I don't want to tear them from this frontier life. I just don't want to lose them. Clara glanced at Silas. He looked back. It was another silent prairie exchange, speaking a whole long conversation without dropping a single word. Vivian, Clara finally said, turning back around. These girls will surely grow up knowing their father's bloodline. Never a doubt. She paused. But know this. If I adopt them by law, they belong to me. They're Whitmore girls. And this ranch? She caught Silas's eye. This ranch is their home ground. Whatever storms roll through, this is it. Vivian looked toward Silas too. Whatever storms roll through. Vivian echoed her tone, proving she caught the drift without needing it spelled out flat. Yes, Clara affirmed. Vivian studied her pale hands once more. Then she watched Eleanor. You and I both know that look. Sizing up the adults with the wise squint of a little one who understood way more than she let show. Then I'll pen a letter to Nathan Hale this very morning, she declared, and write my lawyer back east. Clara exhaled, real slow. It came from deep down. Thank you, she said. Vivian gave her head a brisk shake, the way folks do when heavy feelings threaten to spill over and ruin a perfectly steady moment. Don't. I am doing this for them, and perhaps a little for myself, not for gratitude. Let me tell you, when Nathan rode out 3 days later with that paperwork, he laid it on the table like a man who spent long, hard hours on it. Vivian kept her word, plain and simple. Her letter to that Cincinnati lawyer shipped out the very next morning, followed up by a sworn statement for Nathan's files that same afternoon. Sharp and precise, and entirely ironclad, because Nathan read it over and swore it was one of the finest legal documents he had ever seen drawn up by a layman. She's thorough, he said, without any surprise. She's everything thoroughly. Clara found the adoption paperwork mighty tangled. It had to pass through the territorial judge, and Nathan mapped out the whole trail in his careful, steady way. Step by step. The timeline, what they needed from Clara, and exactly what they needed from Silas. He included Silas, naturally, without explaining why. Silas caught that little detail, but kept quiet. Once Nathan rode off, Vivian finally started packing her trunk. She had been claiming she needed to head back east for 2 days, yet always found some excuse to linger. Clara stopped pointing out the contradiction, mostly because she really did not mind it. You're right. Clara said. She stood there, folding one of Vivian's fancy blouses that had somehow gotten tangled up with the ranch laundry. That made twice in the 2 weeks she had stayed there, and neither woman ever spoke a word about it. "Regularly?" Vivian told her. "I expect letters back." "I will not accept excuses about how busy the ranch is. I'll write when I can. You'll write when I write to you, which will be often." Vivian took that folded blouse without lifting her eyes. "I want to know how they're growing. I want measurements. I want to know when the first tooth cuts through, and I want to hear May's first word." "May's first word is going to be a complaint," Clara answered. "Then I want to know exactly what she's complaining about." Something in Vivian's stern tone shifted, softening just a hair for a fleeting second. "I want to know them." "You will," Clara said. "That is a promise." Vivian finally looked up. It was a mighty rare sight, seeing her iron composure completely dropped away. Just two women looking at each other across a dusty bedroom, sharing 2 whole weeks of deeply complicated history. "You're going to be good at this," Vivian murmured. "You already are." Clara stayed quiet, just stepping over to help lug that heavy trunk. The hired coach rolled up at 10 o'clock. Vivian said her farewells to the twins in the main room. Eleanor went first. Vivian held her for a full minute, holding her like a person determined to memorize every ounce of that child's weight. Then little May, staring back up with the hard expression of a baby reserving her final judgment. "She doesn't trust easily," Vivian observed. "She trusts eventually," Clara noted. "It just has to be earned. She is definitely June's daughter." Vivian set May down, real gentle-like. She straightened her spine, turned, and locked eyes with Silas standing by the door. "Mr. Boon, Miss Ashcroft?" Now you and I know that sharp, assessing look of hers. She stared him down, then turned to Clara. "Don't let this man be stupid." "I'm working on it," Clara replied. Vivian let out a sound that was a genuine, brief laugh and marched straight out the heavy wooden door. She never once looked back at the house. Clara noticed that detail. Vivian Ashcroft was a woman who only ever looked ahead. Looking back was a thing she refused to do. A hard decision she had made years ago and stuck to like dried mud. That stagecoach rumbled down the drive and swung onto the south road. The prairie dust settled back down, and the ranch went dead quiet. Silas and Clara stood shoulder to shoulder on the porch, watching it disappear. "She's not what I expected," he muttered. "She's exactly what she said she was," Clara replied. "She just said it in the wrong order at first." He leaned heavily against the porch rail. His busted ribs were better. Not great, just better. He had been doing less work and a lot more standing and watching things unfold. He handled the idleness with the calm patience of a fella who finally accepted his bruised body was making a pretty reasonable argument. "She was right about one thing," he said. "Which thing?" Clara asked. "That I should stop being stupid." Clara gave him a long, sideways glance. He just stared down the road where the dust had settled, studying those faint ruts where the heavy coach wheels pressed into the dry earth. "Clara, I have been here 7 weeks, he said softly. "And I have been real careful about how I speak, mostly because I didn't know if I even had the right to say these things. I arrived with absolutely nothing except someone else's babies and a borrowed shirt. I just wasn't sure what a man like me was entitled to want." She waited. "But I don't think that's the proper way to view it anymore," he said. "I think I've been out here long enough to know what this is, what I truly feel about it, and about you." He turned and looked at her dead in the eye. "And I think you know it too. I just haven't said it out loud." Clara looked at him. We've all seen how that late summer morning light works on the open prairie. Long, warm, and sharply angled. It caught the rough side of his face, making him look like a man who wasn't careful, provisional, or uncertain anymore, just powerfully, undeniably present. "Then say it," she told him. Silas went real quiet for a spell. Wasn't that he lacked the right words, She saw him sifting for the truest words, not just the easy ones lying around. "I love you," he finally said. "I love those girls. I love this homestead, this dirt, and how you speak to folks, like you truly mean it. And how you never twist my spoken words. And how you rose at 4 a.m. for 7 solid weeks, never once making a single soul feel guilty for needing your help." He held up a beat. "I want to stay. Not as a hired hand, and sure not as this careful dance we're doing. I aim to stay as the man who stands by you when times get rough and when the skies are clear. I want to be their father, if that's—" He caught himself. "It is," she said. He stared. "It is," she repeated. He exhaled hard. It was the heavy kind of breath a man releases when he's been holding it in for a mighty long stretch unaware. He gently touched her cheek, moving real slow since his busted ribs were still arguing against any sudden shifts, and she simply reached right up, pressing her warm hand over his. Then she stepped back, seeing as May had kicked off her 7 to 8 crying fit, early today, a chore requiring both sets of hands. He trailed her inside that old screen door slapping shut behind them. Out in the yard, the ranch fell into that buzzing quiet you only get when a homestead is full. They wed that October. It was a mighty small gathering. Now you and I know Clara hated big fusses, and Silas hated them worse. The little ones were too young to hold opinions, but sure held them anyway. Nathan Hale stood witness. Denton and his bride traveled out from the east. 3 ranch hands who stood tall the night Viane's outlaws rode in showed up alongside the town supply boy. That kid had been hauling Clara's weekly dry goods for 2 years, acting like he had a personal stake in this whole romance. Town busybody Mrs. Pritchard, who'd been gossiping fiercely about the widow Whitmore's domestic arrangements since August, actually sent a gift 3 days prior. A handmade patchwork quilt stitched with beautiful care. Clara spread it right on the main room bed for all to see, not breathing a single solitary word about it to a soul. That silence spoke far louder than any speech. The ceremony ran quick. Nathan read aloud from his prepared papers, laying out the plain and simple frontier law. Clara and Silas spoke their vows, inked their names where told, and just like that, the deed was done. Afterward, out in the dusty yard, with the slanted October sun painting the earth, Silas held May. The babe had quit hollering at 6:50, marking a fresh record, while Clara cradled Eleanor. That little one was gnawing on a stubborn tooth, acting like the delay was a high crime. "Well?" Clara said. "Well?" Silas agreed, tipping his hat. "Nothing's really changed," she murmured. "No," he replied. "Except by law." "And the name?" "And the name." She eyed him sideways. "How does Boon feel?" "Same as it always did." He held her gaze. "How's Mrs. Boon feeling about it?" She chewed on that, like something already true that finally got a title. He nodded slowly. Between you and me, that struck him as perfectly right. Over by the supper spread, Denton's wife was making a grand spectacle out of serving her pie. Meanwhile, Nathan stood swapping tales with a hired hand. That town supply kid was pulling silly faces at Eleanor, the way 13-year-olds do when they secretly think babies are downright fascinating, but play it cool. The whole afternoon felt plain and ordinary, the exact way truly golden days often do. No fireworks or grand parade, just that quiet Western comfort of standing exactly where you belong, doing the right, honest work, and knowing it deep down. Clara had clean forgotten that peace existed. She reckoned it was a treasure she'd held onto once, lost to the wind, and that was just her hard lot. But she was dead wrong. Dead wrong about what form it could take, the heavy toll of finding it again, and what kind of steadfast partner might help shoulder the load. Little Eleanor made a sudden noise. Wasn't that fussy toothache sound, but something brand new. Clara peered down. Eleanor was grinning, not that fleeting windy twitch she'd shown for weeks, but a genuine smile beaming straight up at Clara, with a 4-month-old's absolute, undivided focus. She'd finally decided this rugged pioneer mother was worth smiling at on purpose. Clara stood in her ranch yard that crisp October Tuesday, her husband standing tall beside her, a baby beaming up, and her throat tightening like it had for 3 months straight. And right then, she figured she didn't need to hide that raw emotion anymore. She smiled right back. Now in those official documents Nathan filed with the territorial judge just the week prior. That adoption petition, neatly and thoroughly drafted. 2 pages of steady script the little girls were recorded as Eleanor Calloway Boon and May Calloway Boon. That middle name was Clara's doing entirely. She pitched it to Silas one night without beating around the bush, and he agreed without blinking. They'd both been chewing on it for weeks, just waiting for somebody to draw first and say it aloud. The Calloway name remained. It would always stay. That was the whole point. You and I both know you don't erase a person's roots just because you're riding toward their future. You see, a pioneer woman named June had hidden her little girls under a wagon's floorboards, throwing her own body over them, holding fast. The very least folks left breathing could do was carry that name onward. That is the raw debt the living owe the fallen. Not sorrow, not grand statues either, just a quiet choice to take what they left behind, keep marching forward, and do right by it. You don't squander a gift bought with blood. Clara finally grasped that truth, feeling it much deeper than when she first read June's heavy letter right there on her kitchen floorboards. She understood it the way a rider knows the saddle through months of rough miles. It wasn't just some passing thought anymore. It was hard truth settled deep into her bones. The prairie sun shifted. That autumn afternoon performed the classic Nebraska trick. The whole sky burned gold, deepened into amber, and finally tipped over toward nighttime. The air cooled 10 degrees right before dusk, carrying that sharp scent of brittle grass and the brutal winter creeping closer. It held that crisp scent of seasons ending exactly when they ought to. Meanwhile, inside the cabin, the sturdy little cradle Silas had crafted was already getting way too cramped. He spent weeks of evenings carving a bigger one after the girls fell asleep. He picked sturdier timber this time around and paid far more mind to securing those joints. He wasn't quite done yet. He'd wrap it up before November hit. That bed would hold them safely for another year or so, until they naturally outgrew it and needed something new. And he would build that next one too. That is the homesteader way. You make exactly what you need, tackle the next chore, and just keep swinging the hammer. It was honest work. Hell, it was everything a man could want. Now the first little tooth finally arrived on a Wednesday. It was Eleanor's bottom left peg. She had fought that thing for 6 weeks, showing the raw grit of a trailblazer who knows the only way through pain is straight ahead. Clara discovered it during early morning feeding, feeling that sharp little edge scrape her finger, and announced right out loud to the empty kitchen walls, "There it is," saying it the way folks do when a tiny victory hits, but the whole frontier is still fast asleep. Silas stomped in from the barn 20 minutes later, and she proudly showed him. He studied the baby's open mouth with the quiet gravity of a man inspecting prime farmland. "The next one is coming soon," Clara said. "How long?" "Week, maybe 2. She is going to be ornery the whole time." Little Eleanor, looking fully aware she was acting like a total menace, clamped down hard on Clara's thumb. Clara pulled away with quick, practiced ease. "She is mighty proud," Silas noted. "She ought to be. Took her long enough." Meanwhile, they watched from that brand new cradle, built solid and sanded down smooth so no little fingers could ever catch a splinter, offering a sound that was either pure chance or outright commentary. She had been babbling much more lately, speaking her own little private language, and the whole cabin treated those noises like serious opinions, which suited Miss May just fine. All this happened back in November. Now, you and I know how a prairie winter hits. It doesn't rush. It creeps in with the cold patience of a beast holding all the cards. The mercury plummeted and stayed dead low. The plains grass faded into pale, brittle straw. The sky bleached out bone white most days, that dead, flat color warning you a massive snowstorm is brewing just over the ridge. Silas readied his barn for the freeze. He worked fast, using the sharp instincts of a rancher who knew frostbite will always find its way through an unpatched crack. He piled, earth high against 3 sides of the foundation, and finally plugged up that drafty north window frame that had been whistling since September. He built a sturdy windbreak using rough boards along the west fence line. Denton claimed it was a waste of timber until January roared in, and that fence saved the cattle, proving Denton dead wrong. Clara never rubbed it in by saying, "I told you so." She had no reason to. Denton rode up in February, eyed that windbreak, and mumbled it wasn't a half-bad idea. Out on the frontier, that is basically a standing ovation. Those little girls grew. You and I could say that was the beating heart of those frontier years, the absolute axis spinning everything else around. Eleanor and May sprouted up with the fierce dedication of young wildcats who realized surviving this territory meant getting big fast. They packed on pounds, stretched out taller, and slowly developed real grit. The exact way helpless babies finally become strong individuals. It happened bit by bit, each month revealing a bold spark that had been sleeping there all along, just waiting for enough elbow room to shine. May finally spoke her first word in February, and just like Clara predicted, it was a flat-out, stubborn complaint. She was resting in her wooden cradle, glaring at the glass, while a prairie gale rattled those window panes. Then she turned her head, locked eyes with Silas across the cabin, and stated clear as a bell, "No." Silas slowly dropped the leather harness he was patching. "No." "What?" May stared right at the window, then back to him. "The wind," Silas asked. "You want me to stop that wind?" She scowled at the frosty glass again, looking about as disgusted as a sour prospector. "You and I should look close. I'll see what I can do," he said. He couldn't tame that wind. She looked mighty sour. He jotted the date and that word right into the little pocket ledger Clara bought just for that chore. That sundown, Clara penned a letter to Vivian, painting the whole dusty mess perfectly just to get a chuckle. Clara reckoned making Vivian laugh was a rare, precious prize. Hit the right note and Vivian would bust out laughing. It softened up her whole rigid face, I tell ya. Vivian fired back a reply within 7 days, reliable as a sunrise. She kept her promise on those letters. Steady and packed tight with strong views on matters nobody even thought to ask her about. That was just Vivian's way. And by November, folks stopped flinching. She even rode back for 2 snowy weeks over Christmas, sliding right back into the cabin's rhythm like a sharp hawk who studied the lay of the land and knew where she belonged. She hauled in gifts. She handled those midnight feedings without a single fuss. Come the 4th dawn, she and Clara locked horns hard over the smartest way to soothe little Eleanor's teething aches. They walked away with a brand, new compromise that beat both their stubborn ideas, and they buried that hatchet right there, never speaking of it again. She spun tales of their daddy for Eleanor and May, using a gentle whisper she never wasted on grown folks. Just little things, how stubborn the man was, how his belly laugh rang out, and how he treated horses with that natural, quiet respect you only see in folks raised in dirt. She couldn't bear to talk about their mama just yet, not in any language those little tykes could grasp, but she did share her name. She spoke the name June exactly like she said Thomas. It carried the heavy burden of keeping ghosts alive just by giving them breath. Clara was mighty obliged for that. It was a tough chore she couldn't shoulder herself, standing way too close to the fire of what June left in the ashes, so she thanked her lucky stars someone could. Spring thawed the plains, bringing that territorial court date. Nathan spent the bitter winter stacking evidence against Cutter Villain with slow, agonizing, pioneer patience. And come March, the trap was set. The gavel dropped in the county seat 40 miles south. Clara and Silas rode out early Tuesday morning, cramming into a sweltering room with 40 other souls, to hear a judge chew through the mess like courts always do, slow-beating dead horses. tossing around $50 words to make plain, bloody truth sound like a riddle. Silas took the witness stand on the second morning. He sat up front fielding questions for 3 solid hours in that same calm, steady drawl he used for wrangling cattle. Meanwhile, Clara perched in the third row, her eyes tracking every single expression on the faces of the jury. Stick with me. She watched them finally figure out that bloody river crossing. She watched the whole room's mood shift like prairie weather. A lady sitting 2 rows ahead kept her hands dead still in her lap the entire dragging time, which Clara knew was exactly how folks act when the ugly truth cuts so deep you don't even trust your own shaking fingers. The outlaw who spilled his guts in Nathan's jail testified alongside 2 others. Vane's little black ledger became evidence. June Calloway's desperate letter, snug in its oilcloth wrap, hit the judge's bench too. Cutter Vane sat at the defense table, staring off at absolutely nothing, keeping his jaw shut, because the devil had run clean out of lies to spin. His slick lawyer ran his mouth, but those excuses faded like a dying campfire as the brutal facts piled high, until day 3 brought pure silence. The hammer fell on a Friday afternoon. Clara and Silas stood in the dirt outside when Nathan walked out with the news. The sky was putting on that grand Nebraska spring show stretched pale blue horizon to horizon, clouds racing wild and high above, the breeze smelling like damp, thawed earth and fresh green shoots. Nathan stood on those wooden steps, clutching his dusty hat like he always did, and grunted the word, "Guilty." Then he muttered the hanging sentence which every living soul in town already saw coming. "It's done," Nathan declared. Silas gave a slow nod, face like carved stone. "Does it feel like anything?" Clara asked him, riding the trail home. They were 20 miles deep, leaving town behind, aiming for the ranch down a long, straight, bone-dry wagon road. He chewed on her question. She admired that quiet trait. He always took a breath before speaking, even on simple matters, knowing damn well the untamed frontier punishes a quick, easy answer. "Feels like a thing finished," he mumbled. "Not fixed, just finished." She caught his drift. Fixed meant that bloody river ambush never took place. Finished just meant the bleeding had stopped. A line drawn in the dust saying, "The nightmare ends here." Out west, that ain't a small victory. It ain't nothing. But it sure as hell ain't the same as fixed. You and I both know calling it fixed is a lie, and Clara hated liars. June's letter echoed in court. Clara murmured, "I know. I heard it read. What did you make of it?" He rode on, quiet. "I figured she'd be mighty riled it took this long." He paused. "And I reckon she'd be satisfied with how the dust settled." Clara figured he was dead right on both accounts. But that adoption finally got stamped and sealed come April. Now it wasn't some dramatic courtroom showdown, just a simple paper, signed, witnessed, and filed. Nathan's careful script on that official county form, a judge's ink at the bottom, and it became real the way only paper makes things real out west. Eleanor Calloway Boon. May Calloway Boon. Permanent on the record. Nothing nobody could ever undo. Clara had expected to feel some massive lightning strike shift in her soul. Instead, she felt the exact same quiet settling she knew on her wedding day, like a frontier truth finally got a name. The paperwork was just catching up to the reality, not building it. She told Nathan exactly that while signing. He peered over his spectacles. Folks usually find the official ink mighty satisfying. "I just find it correct," she told him. "That is a different trail." He made that low rumble of a laugh. "Sign here, Clara." And she signed it. You and I know the trail back from the county seat was the same dusty road as the courthouse verdict, long and straight, with fresh spring grass shooting up green on both flanks. A hard, committed green that swore winter wasn't never coming back. Silas drove the team. Clara rode shotgun. In the back, little Eleanor and May, 7 months old and finally big enough to loudly protest getting carried. Rode safe in a sturdy wooden box Clara lined with thick blankets for the trail, wide awake and carrying on their own little campfire chat. It involved some mighty fierce eye contact and a whole lot of babbling back and forth. "They are talking," Silas muttered. He'd been tracking them in a little looking glass rigged to the seat. "They have been swapping tales since January. We just do not speak the language." "What do you reckon they are saying?" May is fussing. Eleanor listens patiently, then does whatever she damn well pleases anyway. He chuckled. "That is pretty much their entire dynamic already." "You bet." Clara glanced over her shoulder. Eleanor had reached out and grabbed May's little hand, which May accepted like a peace treaty after a range war. It will probably be exactly like that when they turn 15. And at 30. Hell, probably at 50 too. She turned back to face the trail. Their homestead was another 8 miles out. The prairie afternoon stretched out long, warm, and golden. "I have been wondering what they will remember of what any of this first frontier year. They won't remember a single lick of it." She paused. Not the treacherous river crossing. Not a single bitter thing before. Not the kitchen basket, nor the night Vane's outlaws rode in. They will not even recall how this old ranch house looks right this minute. She watched the planes roll past. All that hard history will just vanish like it never happened for them. Silas rode quiet for a spell. "Does that eat at you?" She chewed on it, honestly. Reckoned it would, but no. She glanced back at those girls once more, Eleanor and May, gripping hands tight in that traveling box, staring at the big western sky with that deep, steady wonder of little ones who still find this wild world completely brand new. What they will know is whatever happens next. And friend, that future is on us. He nodded. He just drove, keeping that heavy silence a man holds when he's doing serious chewing on a thought. "That is a heavy saddle," he said. "Yes," she agreed. "It is. We will certainly get things wrong, probably often and almost certainly." She caught his eye. "Does that spook you?" He let the thought settle. "Hell no. I survived the trail here, didn't I? Even after a few bad turns. Some mighty significant wrong turns," she agreed, and it led to a claim worth staking. She studied him a spell, his rugged profile cut against the prairie sky. The drifter who rode up to her gate on a dying horse, carrying borrowed intel and somebody else's kin, who broke bread at her table every sunrise for 7 months, who mended her fences, winterized the barn for the freeze, and held little May steady, who spoke low in the dark, and kept watch all night leaning against the kitchen cupboards, just because she had drifted off on the floorboards. "Yes," she murmured. "It did." Years pass just the way they always do on a hard-working cattle ranch. Never smoothly, mind you, but with the relentless push of folks who swore to survive this frontier, no matter the grit required. There were brutal blizzards, and one bone-dry summer that cost them 2 good steers, forcing some mighty grim math over which repairs to make and which to risk delaying. Then came the year Silas's shoulder that nasty old bullet wound, the very one from that treacherous river crossing that Clara packed with rags the night he arrived, flared up and gave him pure hell. He spent 3 grueling months nursing it, getting ornery the way tough men do when their bodies finally remind them they ain't bulletproof anymore. Now listen. There were golden years, too. A calving season that ran smoother than any they had ever seen. A bounty that came in under blue skies and fetched top dollar. A rare summer where the wild grass stayed green deep into August, and the whole untamed prairie felt rich with a lush blessing this harsh territory rarely offered a pioneer. Listen here, because you and I know how the frontier shapes a family. Eleanor and May grew like wild grass through it all. Eleanor was quiet, always watching. Could just perch on a corral fence, watching the cattle work for a solid hour, totally unblinking, taking the world in with the same serious study she gave her own fingers back at 4 months old. Clara saw it plain. That girl had to figure a thing out completely before she'd make a move. a trait that'd save her hide out here or drive her crazy. Right around 2.5, the questions started. Why became her weapon of choice, and she swung it without any mercy, stacking every answer with another why, digging deep until she finally hit absolute bedrock, or Clara just ran dry on words. May, on the other hand, at 3 years old, was a whole different breed entirely. She was loud. The kind of loud that comes from folks who always got something to say and figure the whole county needs to hear it. She hit the dust more than Eleanor, mostly because she ran faster than her little boots could handle. She'd bawl with absolute conviction, then dry up just as fast. No fading out with little May. Not a single leftover sniffle. When she finished being mad, it was over, and she fully expected the rest of the camp to move on too. She befriended old Denton's grandchildren, herded them together, fought with the bunch, and then lined them right back up again. Denton reported this to Silas with a mix of weary grumbling and plain old frontier respect. They were good kids, meaning they were stubborn, hilarious, completely tiring, and worth every single ounce of the trouble. Vivian showed up twice a year, reliable as the changing seasons, 2 weeks for Christmas, 2 in summer. She fit into the cabin just like she did that first winter, rough around the edges. Truth is, Vivian didn't do anything smoothly. Neither did the family. But they got the job done. She'd lock horns with Clara. Sometimes she had the right of it, sometimes not. But she'd always swallow her pride eventually. Out here, that's all you can rightly ask. She spoke to the girls about their true parents, feeding them the story bit by bit, just small pieces of the trail they could carry, slowly painting the full picture for them. The summer the girls turned 4, she brought Thomas Calloway's old Bible, pulled straight from the wagon wreckage down at that fatal river crossing. The lawman Nathan held it as evidence before handing it over. Clara tucked it away with the deeds, never quite sure how to handle such a heavy thing. When Vivian arrived that June and Clara pulled it out, Vivian just held that worn leather for a long spell. Finally, she said she wanted to read it to the girls. And sure enough, she did. Now, she didn't preach scripture. She turned straight to the family record in the back. Generations of names penned right there in Thomas's steady hand. A whole bloodline of folks who lived hard died and signed that book just to prove they walked this earth. She wrote Eleanor and May's names down, herself, scratched them real careful right beneath their blood kin, dated the page, and held the pen out to Clara. "You ought to sign it too," she told her. "Now put yourself in her boots." Clara stared at those names, the ones swallowed by that muddy river, and the ones still breathing. She signed her name, passed the pen to Silas, and he marked it too. No questions asked, because a frontier man knows what family means. That heavy book went right back with the land deeds. The girls had turned 5 when little Eleanor finally brought it up. Out in the dusty yard, late on a quiet summer afternoon, Silas was patching a fence line that had finally surrendered. 5 years he'd been chasing rotten posts, while the rest of it slowly quit. Eleanor sat up on the top rail, watching his hammer swing the way she always did. Completely still, hawk-eyed, letting him drive the nails while she chewed on a thought she'd share when she was good and ready. "Papa," she asked, "were we born on this land?" He laid his hammer on a post and turned. She stared right back with her mother's gaze, those same sharp eyes that had been sizing up the wild world since she was 3 days old. "No," he told her quietly. "You were born back east. Your folks were riding wagons west. You were tiny." She chewed on that. "What happened to them?" Now, you and I both know Silas saw this coming. Him and Clara had sat up nights worrying over it. How much truth to pour, and exactly when to pour it. They figured on giving her the honest truth. Kept simple for a 5-year-old, sure, but no tall tales they'd just have to walk back once she got older. "They passed on," he said, before they ever reached the end of their trail. "Sometimes the wagon road does that. It ain't fair and it ain't right, but it happens out here." She went dead quiet. Then she asked, "Were they good folks?" He looked at her, thinking on June Calloway's desperate letter hidden away in its oilcloth wrapping. picturing a desperate mother hiding her babies under wagon floorboards, laying her own body over them because that was the absolute last shield she had left against the world. "Your mother was the bravest pioneer woman I ever heard of," he told her. "And I didn't even know the lady. I only know what she did for you." "What did she do?" "She kept you safe," he told her. "Even when the trail turned cruel, she made damn sure you and May got found." He took up that heavy hammer again. "She prayed folks would show you kindness, and she was dead right they did." Little Eleanor chewed on that for what felt like an eternity, though it was likely just 30 seconds. A mighty long stretch for a 5-year-old. "Mama was that someone," she said. "And me," he answered. "And Aunt Vivian." "Aunt Vivian, too." The little girl nodded real slow, filing away those hard truths like a ledger. "Okay," she murmured. He turned back to mending that fence. "Papa," she spoke up a minute later. "I'm sure glad you found us." He laid the hammer down once more. He stared at his 5-year-old on that wooden rail baked brown by the prairie sun, her dark mourning braids now wild and tangled from the frontier wind. He looked hard at this girl, who had survived under a shattered wagon floor at 3 months old, oblivious to the terror. A child who had ridden out a tragedy no one asked for, just to sit on this fence this fine Tuesday afternoon, asking sharp questions and sorting the heavy answers. "Me too," he whispered. Now you and I know words fall short out here. There was no right thing to say, but she understood, went back to watching him work, and that was enough. He told Clara that very evening. They sat on the porch like always, the girls dreaming inside the heavy summer dusk creeping in from the east. She took in his entire story without making a peep. When he finished, silence held the porch. "What did little May ask?" she wondered. He sighed. "May didn't ask a thing. She was too busy playing in the dirt picking a fight with some beetle." Clara let out a soft laugh. "That is May through and through." He nodded. They just sat with that peace a spell while the wild prairie woke up. The first stars flared. The tall grass hushed, settling into that massive western silence that ain't really silent if you know how to listen. Crickets, a lone coyote howling west, the big horse shifting in the barn. "June would be right proud," Clara whispered, "knowing where they landed." "Yeah," he muttered. "I reckon so. You gave her that piece. You carrying them 34 brutal miles." She shot him a sidelong glance. "You know that." He just stared into the pitch black. He had been dragging that heavy guilt for nearly 5 years now. The burning grief of what he failed to do at the river, mixed with the miracle of what he did. A man never fully sets a burden like that down. She knew it. He knew it. Let's be honest, you and I know some ghosts never leave. But the load was getting lighter. "I've been mulling something over," he said. "Let's hear it." "I want to work that piece of land up on the north quarter. That flat stretch that ain't worth spit for grazing." He paused. "Maybe build a cabin out there for ranch hands? Or just to have?" He caught himself. "Or keep it for the girls when they're grown, in case they want to stay." She studied his face. "You are actually planning for them grown? Just planning for the chance." He looked her way. "Is that foolish?" "No." She pondered it. "It is what folks do when they stake a true claim. They start looking down the trail of time." She gazed across the dark yard. "When I first rode out here, I dreamed of leaving daily, every bitter winter. Every bone-dry drought here, I wanted out." "So, what anchored you?" "The land," she said softly. "Eventually. The way the sunset catches the summer grass and turns it solid gold. The look of that sprawling dawn sky before a single soul is awake." She took a breath. "And then it was the girls. And you." She locked eyes with him. "And then this place became mine." The way the frontier grabs hold until the line between you and the dirt just vanishes completely. He just nodded. Plant something on that north quarter. She smiled. If you want to build something, raise it up. We will figure out its purpose. He nodded, staring back into the sprawling night. The prairie night sat stone quiet. Inside the cabin, little Eleanor tossed in the new bed they had moved those girls into 6 months back, when the old wooden cradle got too cramped. That sturdy frame Silas carved from solid timber over 3 long spring weeks, the very bed meant to hold them safe for years to come. The shuffling quieted down. The vast plains rolled on endlessly around that glowing little cabin, wrapped around the woman on the porch, her man beside her, and those sweet sleeping children. Kids born right into the bloody jaws of the Wild West, who rode out the storm to find peace in this exact, untamed life. This exact yard, this Tuesday night in Nebraska, with the crickets and the howling coyote. Breathing the scent of summer grass turning a burnt gold as the season died. Clara chewed on what young Eleanor had told Silas out by the fence. I'm glad you found us. She remembered the gritty morning she spotted a strange shape staggering across the far western horizon, a tired horse plodding too slow. A man slumped over the saddle and walking toward that fence line, not knowing what trouble rode her way, but because looking away simply wasn't in her pioneer blood. She recalled the weight of 2 tiny infants in her arms, frighteningly light, and a bleeding man in the dust who tied his arms shut around them. You and I know that love leaves a mark. You and I know she pondered how it could have gone differently every time the thread wore thin. A dusty detour, a different ranch, a horse breaking down 20 miles sooner. Picturing those phantom trails was almost too easy. The trails where this life never bloomed. Seeing those empty roads made the life she actually lived feel like a fragile, precious strike of silver. The wild frontier just handed her a man and 2 young ones. And the trail gave them a fiercely stubborn woman on a porch, holding a laundry basket, refusing to quit when the western winds howled bitterly. They weren't hunting for each other. None of them even knew to look. But out here in the wild, that is exactly how fate deals. You don't strike gold by hunting for a nugget shaped just so. You find the real prize by standing your ground when it finally arrives. By keeping your eyes peeled, deciding that whatever weary soul wandered off the prairie at sundown was worth walking right out to meet. This rugged frontier life was never meant to be comfortable or simple. It carved a toll out of your hide that city folks never pay. But look right there. There was her sturdy porch. There was the fading dusk. And here sat the unexpected cowboy she could no longer picture living a single sunrise without. Inside lay the girls, fast asleep, sprouting up quietly like wild prairie grass. Nothing loud, just slowly becoming the women they were destined to be. They carried the names of fallen folks who loved them, ancestors who simply prayed they would grow up kind. Clara took a long draw of that sweet summer breeze. The Texas stars blazed bright. The plains lay perfectly quiet. It was enough. Lord, it was plenty. You and I can see what she built from sheer ruin, slow, jagged, totally unmapped. Yet through all the heartache, her little homestead was standing tall. And it was real, and it was going to hold.